Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my special guest, Brooke Bownes. Welcome to the show, Brooke. I'm so honored to have you on. Welcome. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to our chat today.
Excellent. And so, Brooke is a certified trauma informed coach, and she is ICF certified coach. And she can talk about that a little bit more as we get going. But our conversation today, I hope, is really going to be informative for people to understand childhood trauma, how you see those effects later in life. And Brooke, you're the expert on this. So why don't you go ahead and just jump right in and tell us what was the path that led you down this road and the decisions that kind of created the pathway for you to become a trauma informed coach?
From my own life experience, really, I had a very traumatic childhood. I started off quite traumatic. As I was being born, I was being strangled by my umbilical cord. So that caused
Mhm.
complications. So that was the first trauma in my life. And the second one was I've actually got a narcissistic mother who put me down at any point that she could possibly put me down, to the point of where she would say, I didn't even have the audacity to be born properly. Why couldn't you be normal like other children? I was ugly. I'd never amount to anything. Nobody would ever love me. I would never do anything in life. So, you know, every put down that she could think to do, I was heard it daily in and out every day. So that affected obviously a lot of my childhood and my self-esteem, and it created what we call inner child wound. And the four main core ones are not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, not feeling lovable, and not feeling important. So with those four going on, every time I went to do something, it was like, well, I'm not worth it. I'm not good enough. Who am I? I'm not important, because I've heard all my life that I can't achieve anything. I can't be anything. So it really affected me as I was growing up. And then I ended up in a narcissistic relationship, which then made me kind of realize actually the common factor here is me. Maybe if I change, then the people around me would change. So I went heavily into working on my mindset, which I did really, really heavily. But it was that I got the great mindset. I knew I got the skills, I got the knowledge, but there was something still stopping me from moving forward and doing those things. And that was feel the fear and do it anyway. And I would build myself up and my heart would be pounding, my palms would be sweaty. I thought, why? Because I've got this knowledge, I've got these skills. Why is my body reacting so badly? And that's when I come across like trauma and how trauma is stored in the body and how it can affect us in our adulthood. So when I started to realize all those things with the trauma and started to release those, I then got to the stage where I could feel the fear, get curious where it come from, process it, and then go on and enjoy doing whatever it was I wanted to do. And that's what I wanted to have for other people, especially I work a lot with women. I know what it feels like to be that scared, shy little child who's too frightened to speak out. My tagline is like scared to stage, where I talk on stage or talk on a lot of Zooms now, just to spread the word about trauma and raise the awareness, and stop it being a taboo subject, so that guilt and that shame isn't there anymore, because that's what keeps it silent and what keeps it perpetuating, because people aren't speaking up about it and saying, yeah, I've been through trauma. Because a lot of people think, well, I've not had a major car crash, or I've not been a soldier fighting in a war, so I'm okay. But if there's something in your life that's stopping you moving forward, you can probably relate it back to something that is said to somebody. Like we were talking about my book, I wrote a book about how to break through the self-sabotage cycle. That's for the viewers who can see it. And I talk about a pet lady in there who, when she was a 7-year-old child, she stood up in front of the class to do a sum on the board, and the teacher threw the blackboard eraser at her, saying, "No, you're wrong. You're stupid. You can't do maths." And that was her belief for till she turned into her 50s, and she needed to have a maths exam to get a promotion. So she called me in to say, "Look, I need your help." But she was very, very clever and great at maths, but she couldn't see that because she'd got that trauma from that sentence. And because he said that sentence and her emotions, she was embarrassed at the time, it formed a trauma in her body. And that thought and that belief was, well, the teacher is an authoritarian, so he must be right. So I must be stupid at maths and can't do it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Everything you just said is so powerful. And I want to touch on a couple of things. And first of all, thank you for sharing the story of your birth and your childhood, because I can't even imagine how difficult that would be to endure that every day. So that you're here now and sharing that so that others can help heal themselves is phenomenal and wonderful. But I want to touch on a couple of things. And one that we often think that what we've been through is not big enough to be worthy of being called trauma. And I've had guests on previously who've talked about that kind of situation where you think it doesn't qualify as trauma. And, that's not really the case. It's really not about the size of the thing, it's what is happening to you, right? And the effects it's having on you. And so that's one thing I wanted to point out, and we can talk a little bit more about. But the other thing is the authoritarian, the person who is, you think knows more than you, and so you take their word for it.
Yeah.
And again, that happens so often. We think this person knows better than me. They must be right.
Absolutely. And especially in children, because up until the age of about 7, they haven't got that critical faculty to actually reason, thinking, oh, maybe the teacher had a bad day. Maybe he had an argument with his partner. Maybe, he's got some stress of his own. He's got some worries and he's just projecting that out. We just automatically, as children, think, oh my goodness, we're in the wrong. It's my fault. It must be me. I must be useless. I must be no good, or whatever that feeling is. So we don't reason it. Like with my mother, when I was little, I didn't think, well, maybe she's had a really bad childhood and maybe she's having a bad day and maybe she's stressed about something. I just thought, oh, well, I must be a bad person to upset my mum so much every day. It must be me, it must be something I'm doing. So then we turn into these people pleasers, trying to please that person so they don't get angry and they don't get upset, which then in our adult life again affects us because we end up being people pleasers, putting everybody else before us and not looking after ourselves and having that self-care. And it's also as well, you see it with people where, well, the doctor said or the lawyer said or whatever, but actually you can always get a second opinion and check it out. And also trust your gut instinct, because as children, I was talking to a client earlier today about this, as children, they trust their gut instinct. If they're tired, they sleep. If they're hungry, they ask for something. They don't keep putting it off thinking, well, I'm not important enough to eat or have any sleep. They just do whatever's needs to be done. But as we grow up and our parents or whoever's in authority around us put their beliefs and thoughts onto us, and they've got their own inner child wounds too, then we believe them and then take them on as our own beliefs. Like with my mother, for example, she's got some huge inner child wounds. Narcissists have huge inner child wounds that are so deep and so raw that they won't actually admit they've got them. So they won't actually ask for any kind of help for them, but they will project it out and blame other people because that's their way of dealing with it and soothing and getting through their life. So it's understanding that, well, especially when we're like 0 to 7, we're very, very susceptible to like taking in everything as truth, what people say to us.
Yeah, that's a good point. You shared your book up on the screen. And so for those who are watching on YouTube, you'll see that. But can you tell us, for the listeners, the title of your book? And let's talk a little bit about that in a little bit more detail about the writing process and what that was like for you. And then also what the book is about. So if you would go ahead and share that.
Yeah, well, that's quite an interesting one because I have these mad ideas in the shower and stuff, and I kind of action them. I'm all about the action. And I decided that I wanted to write and publish a book in 90 days. And I decided it on the 28th of May. I thought, right, I'm going to start it on the 1st of June because that's a very pivotal date for me because that's when one of my granddaughters were born. And I actually helped deliver on my daughter's kitchen floor. So that's another story maybe for another podcast. And then I wanted to have it published by the 1st of September because that's mine and my husband's wedding anniversary. So I thought, right, how can I do it? Because I love to inspire people and get people to think differently about their lives, because especially if they're not happy, like, okay, let's think how you can think differently. So I thought, right, if I document this on Facebook, so every day I'd go on Facebook and kind of talk about the ups and downs of writing my book. I had no idea on the 28th of May what I needed to do to write a book. I knew I'd got loads and loads of content I could put in it. What do I feel about books that I read? Like all the self-help books, they're great, but there's no like exercises at the end of them to make people sort of really think about what they've just read. So I wanted to have like an exercise at the end of each chapter. I ended up coming up with the idea, the acronym of self-sabotage. And so like each chapter, like the first chapter is S for self-care, and the second one is emotions, then loving yourself, and then forgiveness, etc. So you can work your way through it, and it's got 12 chapters in it. But as it happened, as I sort of announced that I was going to write it, somebody, because I'm quite well known in my world, tech isn't my thing, give me a room full of 100 people with issues and I'm in my glory helping them sort it out, but give me something tech to do. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So somebody offered to help me upload it onto Amazon. And then somebody said, well, I know a really good editor. And then my friend who just took some photographs for me, she's a professional photographer. She's actually a graphic designer as well. And she designs books for a major book company. She said, well, I'll design your book cover. And it all kind of just fell into place. And I just every day did a bit of writing, worked out how many words I wanted to write. And it's like 30,000 words. So I broke it down, okay, 2,500 words per chapter. So every day I set out and wrote a chapter in my book and then sent it off to the editor and etc. It was more difficult thinking about which photograph to use in the book, which font to use, what the title of it was going to be. So it was like all these things that you don't think of. What's the thickness of the book? So did I want like my name on the spine and the title on the spine or not? And what size was the book going to be? And all these things. So the actual content of the book was probably the easiest thing to do about it. But you can either work your way through it and sort of feel like you've worked your way through that, how to work through self-sabotage by going through each chapter. Or if you've got a specific problem, like a lot of my clients struggle with forgiving, and it's like, especially forgiving themselves, they can go straight to the chapter on forgiveness, read that chapter and work through the exercise to help them to start that process of forgiving themselves and others if they want to as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love it. And I love that you shared about how writing the book itself wasn't the difficult part because you have the knowledge and you have the experience and you have what you wanted to share with others. It was choosing the size of the book or the font and the title and the cover that was the most difficult part. So that's a funny aspect of it to consider because you'd sort of think that those would be the easier parts.
Yeah.
But I love that you formulated it in a way that each chapter kind of focuses on a specific thing that you need to work on and that you've done it in such a way that's super clever, and having the exercises at the end I think is incredibly beneficial because
Mhm.
like you said, you can read through something but unless you have sort of actionable steps, things that you really can pick apart what you've just read and put it into place, what change really happens,
Yeah. But the most
you know?
exciting thing for me, apart from having a book at the end of it, was how I inspired other people. Because when I announced that I was going to write and publish a book in 90 days, I had so many messages saying, my goodness, you're so brave. I could never do that. Or, what's made you think of doing that? But then people, as it was going along, were saying, okay, you've inspired me to start writing my book. You've inspired me to start a business. You've inspired me to go for my dream job, for my promotion. And one person even said, you've really inspired me to ask somebody out on a date. I've been kind of putting it off for a while, but I think, what's the worst could happen? They could say no to me, but if I just ask them out for a cup of coffee. So to me, as far as I was concerned, the book was a success before it was even published because people were getting inspired to think about what they could do, what they could achieve in their lives. And it wasn't a case of, look at me, I wrote and published a book in 90 days. It was inspiring other people to think differently about themselves. And that's what I'm all about. Now, if you're not happy where you are, and if what you're doing in your life isn't serving you now, get curious about that. Look at that. Think about what you really want to do in your life and work out how you can work towards that rather than being stuck in that place that you don't feel inspired about.
Yeah. I love how you're saying, get curious about your life, about what it is that you're maybe not happy about, because I think that we spend so much time just go, 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 dealing with everyday activities that we don't pause and take the time to reflect on that and think like, what is it that's happening right now that I'm not pleased with, or it's not the direction I wanted to go. We don't take the time to do that. And so we can go just day by day, living in that sort of the hamster wheel, of
Yeah.
life, and instead of really looking at what do I want to do and how can I make that come about. Thank you for sharing that. And I love how it inspired people to really begin that process of attempting things that they maybe had been thinking about but not brave enough to do. So I love that.
Yeah. It's also, if I had a pound or a dollar for every time a client came to me and said, well, that's the way it's always been done in my family.
Mm.
So they carry on doing it, even if it doesn't serve them. It may have served their grandparents or their great grandparents, and there may have been a reason for it. And in fact, there's a little story in the book about a grandparent and a parent doing things. And then the partner of the granddaughter got curious and say, well, why are you doing it that way? And I go into the story about it. So if you want to find out that story, grab the book. But it's we don't question it. It's like, well, if my parents did it, my grandparents did it, that's just the way our family does it. But actually, it doesn't have to be that way because it may have served your parents and your grandparents. But if it's not serving you, making you happy, then you don't have to keep doing that. Just because it's always been a family tradition, it doesn't mean to say it has to stay that way with you and carry on because like with trauma, that can go back 7 generations. So it's like, okay, how can you stop it right now? And like with me, I'm the cycle breaker. The trauma won't carry on, because I've got children and grandchildren now. And that trauma has stopped with me. It won't pass on to any more generations. And that's what I want women to think about in particular, that they don't have to live the life just because their mother and their grandmother, were a certain way and they put everybody else first in their family. It doesn't mean to say that you have to do that the way if that doesn't sit well with you.
Right. And really, when you think about how things were in the past versus how they are now, we're talking about an entirely different world on all levels. And so, what may have worked in the past doesn't work now. It's absolutely not going to work in the future. We have to look at, what is life like now and how can we go forward because we are dealing with an entirely different world. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. And so let's talk a little bit about how we can recognize the trauma and how we can start to deal with that if we've experienced that in our past. What are maybe some things that you might you might see evidence in your life of that you could recognize as this was related to a trauma?
Yeah. So if you're really big on like procrastinating or you've got a big like perfectionism past where you self-sabotage a lot, they are signs that you've had some sort of trauma in your life because you don't feel like you're good enough and you don't feel you're worthy. And how I work is like we've got us as adults as our true self, and we have our inner child. And then we have what we call these protector parts. Now these protector parts will come and show up if they feel that your inner child is not feeling worthy or feeling good enough or feeling scared. And these protective parts can be anything like self sabotage, emotional eating, perfectionism, procrastination, anxiety, overwhelm, depression, all these things that are parts. So it's our body giving us feedback and data to let us know that something isn't quite right. So if you feel like, for instance, I work with a lot of women in business that want to do like a Facebook Live to help them to grow their business. And they're like, I've got the knowledge, I've got the experience, but as I go to do that Facebook Live and click the button, I think, what if I forget my words? What if I get it wrong? But the minute they go, "No," and sort of tighten their shoulders and hold their breath, it's the body sending a signal to the mind to say, oh, danger, danger. Now, our mind and our prefrontal cortex logically knows that we've got the skills and knowledge to do it, but our body's feeling like it's that 6-year-old that's going to get in trouble for speaking out, especially if you're sort of like that midlife age where children should be seen and not heard. It was wrong to speak out and say things. So your body's going to actually stop you from doing it. So it's like there's an alert system going on, like, hey, right, self-sabotage needs to jump in the protector part to protect that inner child. So you will end up self-sabotaging. And I often tell the story about myself when my coach said to me, go do a Facebook Live on your personal profile. And I went, and it's like I did everything. That procrastinating part was a big, big part. And I did everything I could think of other than do that Facebook Live, even to the point of, and I'm sure everybody can relate on the podcast, everybody's got that kitchen drawer that's a bit messy with odd pen tops and elastic band and an odd paper clip, maybe an old conker or something. Well, I even tidied out that drawer. So that was immaculately tidy. Thinking, I'll do that and then I'll do my Facebook Live because my body was saying, oh, if we speak out, that's danger. We're going to get into trouble. So it was stopping me and I was procrastinating. But once I realized what was happening, if then I work with my clients to talk about those parts and get to know those parts and find out why they're shown up, we can then reassure that inner child and do a lot of somatic reprogramming with the inner child so you can move on and actually enjoy it. And it's that again, that rather than feeling the fear and doing it anyway, notice that part coming up, get curious about why it's coming up, process that and then go on forward and enjoy doing Facebook Lives. The first time I ever did a Facebook Live on my own profile, I was so nervous. And because I was in that fight and flight, I couldn't think because all the energy was kind of going to my body because I felt like I needed to physically run or fight, that my camera was around the wrong way and I couldn't think how to switch it round. But I'd geared myself up so much and I was doing that, feel the fear in anyway, just do it. So I just said, well, I'm glad I've vacuumed my carpet today because all you're going to see is my carpet. I'm just going to have to get this message out. And it was one of the best things I ever did because not only have I lived on that story to tell my clients, but out of that, I got two um, people messaged me and became my clients because they said they could so resonate with me. And it was nice to be able to relate to somebody because I wasn't perfectly polished and scripted. They felt like I was like a human being that they could approach. So now I say to my clients who want to do a Facebook Live but are scared, I'm like, can you get the camera around the right way? And they're like, yeah, of course I can. I'm like, well, then you're one step ahead of me because I couldn't even do that. So it makes them at ease, makes them laugh. Think, okay, well, you know, I can't mess up as bad as Brooke can. So yeah, I'm sure I can do it. And then they go on and do their Facebook Live and feel a bit more relaxed about it because it's all about relaxing the nervous system. So you can actually be in your prefrontal cortex and think about what you need to do rather than being in that fight, flight, or freeze situation instead.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I love everything that you just shared. I feel it. I feel that way. I do record our episodes when I'm doing a podcast, and that gives me an opportunity to go and edit. And I think that's a little bit of the perfectionism that I'm, dealing with and wanting to make sure everything is just right. And so the nervousness is maybe not the same as if it was live. And so I love what you just shared. Just realize that you're human, you make mistakes, it's really okay.
Mm,
It's not the end of the world, right? And it makes you more approachable. Like you said, these people realize that she's just like me.
yeah.
She makes mistakes. If she can make this mistake, I can make a mistake and it's going to be okay.
Yeah, you give people permission to be themselves and make a mistake because perfection doesn't exist. And in fact, in the back of my book, because I've got like a sense of humor, I have to read it out because it's a quote. It's like, because there is a mistake in the book that I found. I put PS, perfectionism doesn't exist. Therefore, if you see any mistakes, they are a figment of your imagination. Just for a bit of giggle. But, we strive to be this perfect person, but who are we striving to be that perfect person for? Because people that we're talking to don't expect us to be perfect and they give us the grace of making mistakes. But it's that inner child wound of like, your parents expecting you to be that certain person and living up to their standard, you know, and because they've got their inner child wounds, they think, well, if my child doesn't behave and be perfectly good, people will think I'm not a good enough parent. So my child therefore must behave and be really, really good. When you understand where your parents are coming from and realizing actually your parents are human beings too, that they have made mistakes and they haven't got it right. And one of the best things I ever heard about being a parent is you can guarantee you're going to mess it up because none of them come with a manual. And even if they did, it's not one size fits all because all children are different as well. So, it's giving yourself a break and being kind to yourself because we often are our own worst enemy with that self talk, which I talk about in the first chapter of my book. We wouldn't talk to our best friend the way we talk to ourselves because we wouldn't have a best friend. So why not be your own best friend and talk to yourself kindly and be kind to yourself? Because if your best friend messed up, you'd be like, oh, it's okay, you're a human. But if we mess up, it's like, oh, how stupid are we? I can't believe I did that. And we'd go down this, tirade of berating ourselves and making ourselves feel even worse.
Yeah. So, what are maybe some things that we can do to kind of cut that off at the pass, if you will? And, if we see that we're going in that direction of the berating ourselves, what are some things that maybe we can do to help work through that?
One of the best things is talk to yourself like you are your own best friend, your own best cheerleader, because the only person we hear 24/7 from is ourselves. So it's actually realizing that if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself. Or if you can start to do that and catch yourself, because, we're all imperfect and sometimes I'll do it. I think like saying things like, if I bump into a table, oh, I'm so clumsy. Like when we say I am and follow it by our, our subconscious mind will want to give us more of that. Actually, I wasn't clumsy. It was a clumsy thing I did. So it separates you from the thing that happened. realizing what you're saying. So, like when you say, I am, and then whatever follows is thinking about it. And I often say to my clients, when you say, I am, it's like your subconscious mind kind of like sits up like a meerkat and think, okay, what we doing? So, like if you say, I am clumsy or I am useless at that, you're going to get that clumsiness, you're going to get that uselessness. But if you actually say, I am a very clever person, but I just happen to bump into the table, that's a whole different way of saying things and being kind to yourself because, especially if you've had childhood trauma, you didn't like being told off and the trauma that you went through as a child. So why perpetuate it as an adult? And because we're so used to it and we're used to hearing that, that's our kind of our normal, but actually we need to break out of that cycle and break out of that mold, like breaking through that cycle of self-sabotage or perfectionism or whatever it is that you're struggling with. And actually, realize that it's okay to be kind to yourself. You're the person that you live with all the time. So start being kind to you. Give yourself a break.
That's wonderful. Excellent advice. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to talk a little bit about maybe something that you had shared before with me and the group is how celebrating what you're doing instead of have it be where you think people are going to be like, oh my gosh, she's just self celebratory. She's just maybe saying, oh, I'm so great. I'm so great. Instead, what did you find happen when you were celebrating these wins that you were having? What did you find with the feedback that you were getting from other people?
Okay, well, we'll use the example of my book because I was on Facebook. I decided that every day I was going to highlight the highs and lows of writing a book and what was happening. And so every day I was talking about the book and what I'd done. And so many people were either messaging me or commenting on my post saying, you're really an inspiration. You're really inspiring me to think about different things you do. So when we celebrate, it gives other people permission to celebrate. As children, we're natural show offs. It's a natural thing. Like, you know, if anybody's got children out there or knows of children, like, especially when we're potty training, the minute a child pees on the potty, we're like, yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic because that's the way we learn and think, okay, that I need to do that again to get that reward, that, celebration thing. But as we get older and often through teenage years, we don't want to be noticed and seen, but we kind of lose that along the way. But the thing is, when any of my friends have achieved anything, I'm there cheering them on, thinking, wow, what an inspiration. I don't think, oh, she's a show. She needs to like get back sit down and be quiet because who does she think she is? But we grow up with that if we're in a traumatized child. I mean, I can remember doing things and my mother saying to me, sit down and shut up. Who do you think you are? You're getting too big for your boots. It'll end in tears. What will the neighbours think? Which I always thought was very bizarre because I lived on a farm and our nearest neighbour was like a couple of miles down the road. So we didn't technically have any neighbours. But again, it was her in the child wounds of not feeling good enough as a parent. So it's like understanding where that feeling of not being allowed to show off comes from. Is it a belief that's come from your parents? Is it a belief that's come from your grandparents? And is that belief still, helping you and serving you? Because if it's not, then change it and do something about it. I show off a lot, so if you want to use that, celebrate a lot. I'm always celebrating things that I've done, things that my clients have done. Like, for instance, I've decided to do 31 podcasts in 31 days, and I posted about it on Facebook. And I've had so many people message me saying, you've inspired me. I'm going to do 30 days of this, or I wouldn't have thought about it. Nobody once has said to me, you were big-headed and being a bit of a show off, wanted to do 31 podcasts in 31 days. I don't know if I'll achieve 31 podcasts in 31 days, but I've got 13 booked already and a talk in a membership group. So I had 13 more than I had before I started on Monday morning. So to me, yay, that's a success. If I do hit the 31, that's great, but I'm not attached to the outcome. I'm just celebrating the things I do as I go along, which also gives my clients permission to celebrate themselves, which then gives their children permission to celebrate themselves. And I'm a huge believer in that ripple effect of like, I walk my talk and talk my walk, as they say. So if I'm celebrating myself, my clients will celebrate themselves. Therefore, their children and their friends and family will celebrate themselves. And everybody's on that. Oh yeah, let's cheer everybody else on rather than putting everybody down.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Excellent. I love it. And yes, what you said about you may not achieve the goal of 31 podcasts in 31 days, but you're so much further ahead then I think that's something that we all need to remember, and that we set these goals. And instead of looking at it from the point of view of, well, if I don't achieve it, then I've failed,
Mm.
it should be from the other side. It's like, but I'm so much further ahead than I was before I even attempted
Yeah.
this. And I think that that mindset shift makes all the difference, right?
Mm. And also as well, I never say I've either succeeded or I fail. I either succeed or I learn from it. And I quite often like to make mistakes and fail as such because you learn so much from the mistakes you make rather than you do when you succeed. And I always love to make a mistake now. It might sound a bit strange, but I always turn it into some sort of positive. Like I did a TikTok reel the other day that and I realized that autocorrect had changed your from Y-O-U-R to Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, and it didn't make sense. But 6,000 people had seen it by that time. Now, if that had been like 10 years ago, I would have gone, oh my goodness, I must delete it. I don't look professional. Oh my goodness, what are people going to think of me? All those protective parts coming in. But my instant thought was great. Take a screenshot of it. I'll post a post on Facebook and talk about the mistake I've made, that even though a mistake was in the title, my message still got out to 6,000 people. And I had loads of messages and people contacting me saying, "Oh my God, that so relates to me. Thank you. That TikTok has helped me so much." So I kind of call myself out on my mistakes now. And then I let people know and see them. So, I'm still building a really successful business, but, things happen along the way. Autocorrect can sometimes change things if you're busy. You think, okay, right. And you put it out there. Oh my goodness. But I've learned the lesson from that. So the next time I do a TikTok, I will double check the title before I press send, or post. So yeah, lesson learned and move on. I'm still alive to tell the tale today. So nothing happened. My world didn't implode or anything.
Yeah. I love that you used it also as an opportunity to work on yourself, but to share with others so that they can learn from that point too, right? That it's really more important the message that was out than one little typo or misspelling.
Yeah.
That's nothing compared to what the true message is that you got out. And so that's fantastic. Well, I have so enjoyed our conversation, Brooke, and you mentioned your book, and I know you've showed it for the YouTube viewers, but if you could mention it again for the listeners of the show, that would be great.
Yeah, it's called You Can Have It, How to Break Through the Self-Sabotage Cycle. It is on Amazon. And if you type my name, Brooke Bownes, in, it will come up. But I'll also send you the link so you can pop them in the show notes, the US link as well. So people can order it from Amazon. It's on Kindle and in print as well. So they can choose which way they order it as well.
Excellent. And so speaking of books, are there any other books that you have found to be beneficial for you or influential in your life that you would like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, a book called My Mother's a Narcissist. It explains about how mothers are and the difference between like being a golden child and a scapegoat. And it really helps you to understand why they are the way they are and how you can actually live that way. So that's a really good book to think about with that. And also something like The Body Keeps the Score is a really, really great one. And there's a book by Oprah Winfrey. I can't remember what it's called. I'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes, but it's about you're not who you think you are sort of thing. It's if you can be who you want to be. So you're not your past basically. So that was a really, really great book that people can find. And I'll have a look at the title of it. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it's a really good book to read as well. So yeah, but just to sort of before we finish up, I've actually got, because I know this is going out in August, I've actually got a free boot camp that's happening at the end of September, all about heal your inner child to heal you. So if anybody's interested in that, I will also give you the link for them to sign up to that in the show notes. It's a 3-day boot camp that's absolutely free and it's going to be online. So even if the time zones are different, they can watch the replays of it as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Brooke. I appreciate it. And for sure, I'll include the names of the books in the show notes, and the links we'll share as well. And is there any podcasts that you listen to that you think would be helpful for the listeners?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of Stephen Bartlett podcasts and Mel Robbins. They're
Mm.
two really, really good podcasts to listen to, talking about all different things about your mindset and about your body and about how you eat and what you eat and how our food affects our mood and stuff, which, I talk about a lot, because when we've had a very traumatic childhood, we don't always think about putting ourselves first and think about how we feed ourselves and how we look after ourselves. So that's a really important thing as well.
Yeah, excellent. Mel Robbins' podcast is phenomenal. I love it. I listen to her shows all the time. They're so great. So I'll include both of those in the show notes as well. And Brooke, thank you again so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and information with us. It's been so incredible what you have shared. And thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.